Not content with your content? Don't stress. Today's episode is all about heteronyms. What? Okay, I'll explain on the other side of this musical soundbite. I'm John Paulus, and on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, I'm going to talk about homographs, which is just a fancy Greek word for words that are spelled the same, but specifically homographs that are pronounced differently. So those are sometimes called heteronyms. And heteronyms, I guess the opposite of homonyms, words that look different but sound the same. The heteronyms look the same, but they sound different. A great example in English of this phenomenon are the words content and content. And in every dialect of English that I have encountered, and every accent that I've encountered, and I've encountered a lot of accents in the English-speaking world, the distinction between content and content is one that is a fixture. If you know of any dialect of English where content, the noun, and content, the adjective, are pronounced in the same way, then let me know in the comments. Oh, there's one that's not a heteronym. The comment and comment is the comment, the verb. Like I am going to comment on your content. That always is pronounced comment. And so is the noun, your comment, your comments are welcome. That's always pronounced with the initial syllable stressed. And this phenomenon is sometimes referred to by linguists as initial stress-derived nouns. So the stress, don't stress out about, that's why I said don't stress out about your content. But also at the end of this episode, I'm going to draw a card from the Life's Potluck Buffet deck to see how we can figure out how to be more content with our content and of our work and our lives and so forth. So stick around for that. But first, initial stress-derived nouns. There are a whole list of nouns, you can find them online really easily, where in most dialects of English, the noun version of a word that's spelled the same is pronounced with the stress on the first syllable, and the verb form, or in some cases, the adjective form, is pronounced with the stress on the last syllable. Let me give some examples of words that I don't think there's a dialect out there that this distinction doesn't hold true for. So, there are words on the list that I'm looking at right now. There are words where I know certain dialects pronounce the words the same. But I've narrowed the list down to just a handful of words that I have never heard pronounced differently in any dialect of English. Let me give you an example first of one that I've heard pronounced, interchangeably. And that's permit and permit. Usually, mostly the permit is the noun. So, have you pulled all of the permits for that construction work you're doing? There's an example. To pull a permit is to get a permit for, in this case, construction work. That is usually permit with the accent on the first syllable, the initial syllable, when it is a noun. So the stress is on the initial syllable. In the case of the verb, I'll give you an example. Permit me to introduce myself, where permit means allow. But I have actually heard people call permits permits. So I can't say that initial stress noun rule always applies in all dialects for permit. And I've gone through this list, and I went over every single word in the list, and there are quite a few. And I keep on eliminating them because I can think of an example of a dialect where the word gets pronounced either without the initial stress, or you can use stress on the last syllable in both instances. There are very few hard and fast examples of this. In fact, I would say there are only a couple that I could figure out from this list. One of them is content and content that I have never heard. As I said, I've never heard those two being used differently from this rule. And the other one was record and record. That example is one where, when we're talking about a record, as in I have a lot of jazz records, that's record, that's the noun, but the verb is record. And I've never heard someone say, I'm going to record this in my journal. Yeah, that's not, I just haven't. And also, I haven't ever heard someone called a Beatles album a record. So that record and record, that's one that's really hard and fast rule. They don't get switched up or anything like that. The initial stress noun stays that way in my experience always, and there's no example I could think of in any dialect of English where the final stress isn't the verb doesn't have the final stress of record. So that's one good example. Unfortunately, you can't, that hardly makes a rule. The exceptions to the rules are the rules in the case of English. And for those of us out there who are first language speakers of English, it's not something we often think about. But for people who are learning English, I know you're thinking about it all the time because it's crazy, right? So and this is why, is because all of these words in English has hundreds of thousands of words. Unlike many other languages, English has taken so many loan words from other languages that it doesn't have rules on how to pronounce them. So that's why there's so much confusion in various dialects of how we should pronounce a word, because it's not originally a word that's in the English language. It was borrowed from one of the many hundreds of languages that English has borrowed words from. So these words tend to be borrowed from Latin through the French. That's the kind of tendency with these initial stress noun words, is that they're Latin words borrowed through French in somewhere in what we would refer to as, I guess, the Middle Ages. Another one that I noticed that I haven't seen any confusion about is the word refuse for the verb, like as in my bank refused the transaction. And that word refuse, to reject, is when in a noun form is refuse. And these are from the same word in Middle French, and they so it's not as though they're coming from different words, but this is one of those examples where I haven't heard someone call garbage, i.e. refuse, as in that is this, are we keeping this? And you say, no, that's refuse. No one's ever said that. But anyway, you get the point. That's no, sir, that's a refuse. Someone said that in Oxford in England in 1925. But anyway, refuse is a commonly used word for trash or garbage. Or I guess rubbish, maybe you'd say rubbish in the UK nowadays. But the refuse is what is rejected and therefore trash. So that use of that rule, the rule there applies as far as I have ever heard every time. I haven't heard an example in my life of someone switching those up or pronouncing them the same. So that's the story with the multisyllable heteronyms. In terms of monosyllables, you know that in English there are a lot of monosyllabic heteronyms. I'll give you one that the American Dictionary, Merriam-Webster, trots out, and that's the difference between bass, as in Barry White has a bass voice, and bass, as in the store received a shipment of frozen Chilean sea bass. How's that for an improvised example? So those words actually come from different roots. bass, as in a low singing voice, is actually related to the word base, as in the bottom of something, or the base of it. That they're actually related. So that actually kind of makes sense to me. A bass, as in the fish, is related to a Germanic word for a perch, another type of fish, and that's bersich, which becomes bears in English, and eventually bass. And that's from a different root completely. So that's also interesting because that one of them comes through kind of Latin, French, Romance language filter, and the other one comes from the German language root. But that's just a thought. Honestly, as you know, rules mean very little in English, except for when they mean something, which is why it's a really frustrating language to learn. All right, so let's ask the cards what they think about content and how we could be more content with our content. Make sure that you keep this in your records and that you record it. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles, cards, tell us some things. All right, here we go. It's card 37, the third time's a charm. Say 3 things. Oh, this is a great way to be content with your content. Say 3 things you want to do for yourself or for others, and write those out. Don't even think about it. Just write them out. Just 1, 2, 3, ABC, however you want to do it. And then when you're done, look at them and see what C is. You'll do all of those things, but usually I find that deep down, the third thing you say there is probably your priority. So when you're thinking about your content and you want to be content with it, then record your answers to that question. I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet. Tomorrow's episode.